Guys, in today's presentation, this is a segment from a longer live stream that we had. And if you watch till the end, I'll make sure I link up the entire live stream so you can get a full context. SDA Pearl representative Joanna was on our channel about a couple days ago and presented some very eye-opening, disturbing reality that's happening with our church in things you never heard, or at least I've never heard about before. At least I was not able to connect the dots to that degree. And I think this is going to be an eye-opener for some of us. And my appeal is that, number one, we want to see positive changes. And number two, we want to pray for our church. And number three, we need to get ready. We need to get ready. Okay, so watch the video. Make sure you go and watch a longer segment of that. I will be uploading throughout the week segments from that video so you can get the context and everything else. This is only part of a much longer presentation. Check it out. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you in the comment box.
But I wanted to make sure that in the middle of my presentation today, which is now, it's not quite the middle, but I want to make sure that I make it very clear that whilst what I'm about to share with you, which is in addition to what you might have seen on Med Missionary, may create some cognitive dissonance, God always provides a way of escape so that we can have cognitive agreeance with the good and very good again. And so don't become addicted to bad news. Don't become addicted to, I guess, the conspiracy thing. Become addicted to Christ, because he has the solution to this whole issue. So I'm going to share a few issues that really revolve around these core problems. We as a people, and it's not just Adventism, I've actually got another presentation that looks at what we have done in Adventist Church is replicated across all major denominations. But we have, as a church, accepted an alternative source of truth, and that's peer-reviewed science. We have not remained with the sola scriptura movement of the Protestant Reformation. We've also accepted a false unity with the world instead of primarily with Christ by faith, which are some other tenets of the Protestant Reformation. As a consequence, we have come under a false authority, which is the man-made or created beings, which ultimately is Satan, who becomes our authority. And so we're no longer driven by the grace of God and for the glory of God. It actually becomes about more glorifying the efforts of man. And as a consequence, both ADRA and the General Conference of the SDA Church have joined in a league with the UN and the World Health Organization. So the World Health Organization is just an arm of the UN. And of course, there's other political agencies, both in the US and Australia and all around the world, that we get money from. And so that actually creates a league, and that what God says about creating a league with the nations. He says, and you shall make no league with the inhabitants of this land. You shall throw down their altars, but you have not obeyed my voice. Why have you done this? Wherefore I also said, I will not drive them out from before you, but they shall be as thorns in your side, and their gods shall be a snare unto you. And that is exactly what has happened to us. We have become ensnared by our relationship with these organizations. Now, just a little bit of information about the United Nations. Obviously, the US was the driving force behind the development of the UN. It started as the World League of Nations in the early 1900s, but in the 1940s, it became the United Nations, and it was very much driven by the US. But these are the 5 permanent members of the of the UN. So you've got China, France, Russia, United Kingdom, and obviously the United States. And it's interesting how the UN works. There's 1 vote per member. So there's there's I think it's 15 or 18 other members, but they go on rotational basis. So they have terms. The 5 permanent members are always there. So they have 1 vote per country, member state. But the permanent 5 have a special veto privilege power. So even if the majority of the UN Council votes to to do some sort of resolution, one of those 5 permanent members can veto it. So obviously, if the US sees that 99% of all the other member states want X to happen, but they don't, they can veto it and it doesn't. So that's the power that these member states, these permanent member states, have. Now, it's interesting, there is only 2 other permanent members of the UN. These are observer members. So the Holy See is one of them, which is obviously the Vatican, and the other one is the state of Palestine. Now, they're not equal in their observer status. So this is actually taken from, I've left on my slides here, I've left the URL. I actually did a lot of my sourcing by using ChatGPT. So it actually is a really good search engine, by the way. It's not good if you're not going to the original article, but it does help finding a lot of these articles. So if you see my URL link, if you just take off the ChatGPT thing there, that's the exact URL link. But anyway, this is the status of the Holy See at the United Nations. This is the article. And down the bottom of it, I just copied and pasted it into here because it was a bit small in its font. These are the things that it says that it has as a permanent observer. So the right to participate in the general debate of the General Assembly, the right to speak under agenda items at a plenary meeting, and I've summarised that. So they can speak as if they're a member state. The right to make interventions, and with a precursory explanation or recall of relevant General Assembly resolutions, so they can actually say, hey, let's discuss this resolution some more. They have a right of reply. The right to have their communication documents disseminated without any intermediary to sort of mitigate anything that they say, so they can actually be disseminated as official documents of the Assembly. They have rights to have their communication from the conferences that happen as part of the UN to also be disseminated. The right to raise points of order, the right to co-sponsor draft resolutions and decisions. And it's interesting here, notice it says seating for the Holy See shall be arranged immediately after member states and before the other observers when in participants as a non-member state observer with the allocation of 6 seats in the General Assembly Hall. So even though there's 5 permanent member states, there's this 1/6 seat that must always be there for the Holy See. And the only thing that they don't have the ability to do that is different from the permanent member states is the right to vote or put forward candidates in the General Assembly. But everything else they can participate in. The Palestine, which is the only other permanent observer, does not have a right to submit a proposal, amendments, introduce them, the right of reply, the right to raise procedural motions, or include points of order and requests to put proposals to the vote. So notice that even though they both have the same name given to them, they do not have the same power. So essentially, if you really want to say who is in charge of the UN, it's those 5 member states plus the Holy See. And so when we look at uniting with an organization like that, it is actually very troubling because we are, we've been very good at making sure that it's very clear that we aren't participants in the World Council of Churches, but the UN is an ecumenical movement and we are participating members of that ecumenical movement. Now, I shared this on the Med Missionary presentation, but my slides didn't work so well on there because it wasn't recognizing PowerPoint. So I just want to reiterate this. This is what, when the GC in May 1985 signed up to be an NGO of the United Nations, they had to actually agree to this particular document. It's found on the UN website, and I've got it's the digital library of the UN. That's the link there if anyone wants to look it up. It's called Arrangements for Consultation with Non-Government Organizations. That's the document. And this is the bit that, if you go back, this bit that I'm just going to show you is just down the bottom here, but I've just enlarged it so you can read it. it says that the organisation, so the NGO, shall be concerned with matters falling within the competence of the Economic and Social Council with respect to international, economic, social, cultural, educational, health, scientific, technological, and related matters, and to questions of human rights. So we have to come into union on all key areas here. So the economic, social, cultural, educational, health, scientific, technological, and related matters, that kind of just includes anything, and to questions of human rights. So their version of human rights is what we need to accept as well. So when it comes to religious liberty, we need to accept the UN version, not necessarily the Sola Scriptura version. And then it says the aim and purposes of the organisation, so the General Conference of the SDA, shall be in conformity. And this is the bit that, even though there's all of the other stuff beforehand, which is really concerning, we have to be in conformity with the spirit, purposes, and principles of the Charter of the United Nations. It's a very interesting term to use, that word spirit. If you look at the history of the UN and its interaction with the Lucis Trust, and they actually train the goodwill ambassadors for the UN. Their headquarters in the UN is actually, in New York. Lucis Trust is right next door on the same street as the UN. That's how integrated they are. And if you look at a lot of the spiritual dimensions of the UN, the spirit behind it is not the one that we find in the Sola Scriptura.
Correct.
Now,
could I ask one question here?
Please ask.
My first question is, what relation does this this connection we have with the UN, how much of an impact has this had with the recent revelation that the Adventist Church was helping with the illegal migrants, and in some cases they were funding it? So how much of a connection is there?
I believe it's 100% the reason why we were involved. We have to, in order to continue to be members or have that consultative status with the UN, we have to administer all of their initiatives. We have to be aligned with their Millennial Development Goals. And I'm actually about to show you that. If we want to remain in the good books, we have to do exactly what they say.
Wow.
Now, just to help you understand, there is a document that was released after the Vatican II Council. This is taken from the California Catholic Conference, which is obviously a Catholic website, and they confirm this. They say, I'm not even going to say how the word that it's said, hope and joy, apparently, is what it's meant to be translated as, was issued when the Second Vatican Council ended in 1965. The document summarizes the council and gives an outline of the Church's social teachings in a changing world. And so if you go to the Vatican website, you can find this document. There it is there. That's the top of the document. It's a very long document. You kind of have to scroll through a lot of stuff to really try and figure out what their agenda is. Primarily, it's all about unification of the world. But this was the statement that I just went, oh, wow, that's really insightful. Like, in the scheme of what we've been through over the last few years, may the faithful, therefore, live in very close union with the other men of their time, and may they strive to understand perfectly their way of thinking and judging as expressed in their culture. Let them blend new sciences and theories and the understanding of the most recent discoveries with Christian morality and the teaching of Christian doctrine, so that their religious culture and morality may keep pace with scientific knowledge. I'm just going to move a little box here and hope that I don't go off the screen. And with the constantly progressing technology, thus they will be able to interpret and evaluate all things in a truly Christian spirit. This is what unification means from a Vatican II Council. We unite Christianity and our philosophy that we get from the Bible, although they don't say the Bible here, but that's their whole idea, is to try and unite Christianity with science and every other technological advancement. And you see that reflected right throughout a lot of the UN documents as well. Now, just in case people don't feel that I'm telling the truth, I mean, Neil Wilson himself said in Advent Review back in 1985, he heralded it as a great success that the UN and GC had come into alignment. This is actually taken from the NGO branch. This is the website that they have, and you will see that the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church is listed as an NGO under their website. And like all good NGOs that are consultative members of the UN, they submit their reports every, I think it's 3 years. And I wasn't able to obviously get the last two reports. I would have really liked to have gotten them, but as you can see, they're not blue, so they're not hyperlinked. I'm curious to know why, but anyway, I just had a look at the last one that you could have a look at, and that's this one. This is their report. Now, these ones are actually summary reports. You don't actually get full access to their full report. It's only a summary report. And so it says here that so they've been a special consultative member since 1985, so that confirms that date, and they always have to say when they actually became a consultative member. But this goes through all of the different things, the aims and purposes of what we do, our numbers, how much we have as our membership, and our educational institutions. So just make sure we reveal everything that we've got going on to the UN. Contribution of the organization to the work of the United Nations. So we have to confirm that we have contributed to the work of the United Nations, that we've also participated in all the meetings of the United Nations, and we need to make sure that we cooperate with United Nation bodies. So not just the UN, but anything that's associated with the UN as well. So there's a whole bunch of other things, not just the World Health Organization, but there's UNESCO, and I can't remember all the different acronyms, but there are so many different bodies that are associated with the UN that come under the umbrella of the UN. And so they give a report on how they are actually, being faithful in their duty as an NGO. And so I've made this a bit bigger so that you can read it, because it was a bit small on the screen. This is obviously the same section, cooperation with United Nation bodies. And so it says, the Office of the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventists disseminates materials from the United Nations through the communication channels, and then it goes on to say, at the United Nations Liaison Office. It provides information on items of concern and research documentation to the United Nations. And then, sorry, I accidentally drew over this D here, but initiatives taken by the organization in support of the Millennium Development Goals. The General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventists actively affirms, develops, and educates on the principles of religious liberty and freedom of conscience enshrined in the United Nations documents. And it goes on to talk about that particular thing. Okay. But then it also...
Millennium Development Goals, does that have any relationship with the 2030 initiatives?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
stop.
Yes, that's correct.
Oh, boy.
Yes. So we are helping the UN to work towards the Agenda 2030 agenda, being very faithful in that, and that's why we actually give reports. Now, once again, this is a summary report, so we don't actually know everything that the General Conference does in order to align themselves with the dictates of the UN. So there is likely to be other things in there, but...
But there is the climate change agenda, and there is also a call for Sunday Green Sabbath. We know it's an appeal for Sunday, so the UN is backing that up. So for us to be connected with that, in essence, we are helping. We are helping in the enforcement of the mark of the beast.
Exactly, and this is the biggest concern, that we are actually going to be involved in taking away people's religious liberty. So. ADRA, in order for it to be a humanitarian agency under UN, it actually has to sign off on a code of conduct, which I didn't put that into here because I thought I was specifically just focused on the GC and its involvement with UN. It didn't actually sign off on a code of conduct, but to be an NGO, it is actually under this branch of the UN, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, and it has on its website, it has these principles. This is a document downloaded from their website. which define how it needs to operate. So it has to operate with neutrality. Humanitarian actors must not take sides in hostilities, which is a good thing, or engage in controversies of a political, racial, religious, or ideological nature. And so from that perspective, but the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church as an NGO of the UN cannot be engaged in anything that could be seen as hostile from a religious perspective. Now, we know that some of the things that we believe are hostile.
So that also means we cannot evangelize.
Well, that's what I was going to say. You can't.
That means you can't share the gospel.
Well, you can't use the Bible as a foundation for any reason that you make a decision. That's basically what that's saying, right? That cancels out the sola scriptura.
That's right. If anything is seen as,
Is this just not common knowledge to us as Seventh-day Adventists?
I don't think most Adventists are aware of this.
I did not know that we were connected to the Union, the United Nations.
Yeah.
Wow. And then I think what's so interesting is it's not obvious language.
No.
It's so subtle that you could just pass over it. And I think that's where us as lay people, I really appreciate this education that you're giving us, but it is pretty mind-blowing to see that it can almost create a sense of, I'm glad that you said earlier about how but God, because it can create a sense of hopelessness from being part of this group, because think about everyone who's fighting because of the situation that happened in 2020 with those injections and those things. And wow, so when we're fighting, it's like our fight is in vain. That's what it can feel like. But it's not. We know it's not.
Yeah,
But
we are facing a brick wall in a sense because
because of our connections as a conference, we would have to literally pull out
some deeper roots that are behind. Yeah.
Yes, this is so deep that their hands are tied as well, which means even if they wanted to, even if certain key leaders wanted to, because of this contract that they have signed, their hands are literally tied. And then how do you say, I would want to, but in 19 whatever, we connected with the United Nations, and this is part of our contract here. Wow.
That's right.
Well, this is very enlightening. This is
eye-opener.
It is an eye-opener, and it makes things make a lot more sense.
Okay. Now you can understand the nature of why the controversy is so difficult to address in the church.
Yes.
And why we still fighting about the reaffirmation statement. Why we still can't even take that down. Because there's some serious deeper roots here, and it is bigger than some of our leading men. And I think some of our men are very honest and they have good intention. It's bigger than them.
Absolutely. It is way bigger than them.